for posterity. There we go. All right. So thank you everybody for coming to the second meeting here. And John and I sent out a couple documents prior to us getting together today. One was the sustainability plan, which I'm sure the three of you who are here right now are pretty familiar with. But in addition to that, I sent out a summary of the goals, values, and strategies that are in the plan. And John was nice enough to point me towards the areas of the plan where these are listed. And what I tried to do is consolidate them down to 3 pages. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and share that right now, share that screen with you. And I guess the overall intent with this meeting would be to take a look at those goals, values, and strategies and see if there's anything that you'd like to add to them or emphasize in the comprehensive plan. And so as I bring that up, I'm going to switch my screen that you can see and we'll take it from there.
If we were to emphasize something, Carlos, what shape or form would that take?
So what that would take is we are doing an introduction and a context before all of these goals, values, and strategies. So what we would do is make sure that what the committee's input is provided in that context prior to listing these goals, strategies, and values. So if there are specific things in addition to that aren't listed here that you'd like to call out, or if there's things that are already listed that you would like to emphasize, that's where we would do it.
Oh, okay, so they would show up in, for example, because this is actually a question I was going to ask during our conversation this morning, that it's either that we have a chronology of the strategies, or we just have bullets, as long as it's either clear that there is no priority, one versus the other, or if we do mean to have a priority, that we state that. That's kind of what I was thinking about. I just didn't know exactly what the approach would be when the final document comes out.
Yeah, so the approach would be to say that these are all of the sustainability values and strategies, goals as well that are in the plan. But in addition to that, the subcommittee that was working on the comprehensive plan feels that this is the one that is the most important or should be looked at first type of thing. And we would put that in an introduction or a preamble to these goals, values, and strategies right in the environment and sustainability section of the plan.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that I have any preference, but if we go through section by section, that might come up.
Sure. And so, John, could I hand it over to you to kind of go through these goals, values, and strategies?
Sure. You want me to run through them all, or we just start with one and discuss?
Yeah, start with one and discuss and take it from there.
Okay. So yeah, right now, first on our list are energy, and there are kind of 3 broad goals that our sustainability plan highlights and that Carlos has included here. And that the first is to increase uptake of renewable energy, so add more clean energy, maximize energy efficiency and conservation as kind of alongside that, and ultimately achieve our goal of the city being net zero by 2050. This was a goal that was in our energy action plan back in 2017. So there's a lot to go into that to meet that. But some of the strategies that the sustainability plan calls out are to really have the city lead by example and make sure that we are doing a good job of being energy efficient. and working on having our own renewable energy sources, whether that's through subscription to offsite panels or putting things on our own buildings. A priority of work on conservation is working with members of the low-income community who have an energy burden, both from equity standpoint and also some of the best efficiency options can be there. We want to do business outreach in particular because businesses do use more energy than anybody else, just by the sheer size of their operations, and to be more of a resource there and connect with the various utility programs. And so I guess that kind of goes to the next one too, connecting with programs, and if there are grants to bring those forward for our use as a city or for our businesses or community. And the last piece is to evaluate and imagine policies that make energy efficiency and renewable energy more accessible. And so I guess that's more of a public education piece too, is partly bringing what's out there, what's been done, what we have, what's in place from Excel and My Energy, so that stuff is out in the public. So kind of being a partner with them and maybe and CERTS as well. They've been a good partner. They're a state clean energy advocacy organization. So with that summary, maybe we start back at the goals here and talk about are we hitting everything we need to with those, or is there anything missing, or thoughts on the language even?
John, just a quick question. When you say cities net zero, you're referring to Winona facilities, correct? Not public and private entities. Or is that the city in its entirety?
The way it's written is our ambitious goal is to have the entire city be net zero. So it
doesn't apply to all entities. Okay.
Yep. And there's nothing absolutely binding about it, like if we don't do it or we're requiring it, but that's the goal.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. That's a much bigger goal than just city facilities, clearly.
Yes, indeed.
But I mean, if there are, and we've already seen this, where community business leaders have made major improvements in energy consumption. Barron's did an entirely new lighting system, I think. So lots of things are happening in private. I don't know, what we use in electric motors is unconscionable. And I don't know that there's an answer, but certainly the source of that electricity, that's something that you can always work on.
I think that goals need to be broad, and I think this seems to cover it. Not looking at the full document. I don't have the full document open, but this seems to cover things well enough as far as the goal go.
Yeah, and so what we would do with this is the text that would go in the comprehensive plan, and we would just reference the rest of the document as a reference, so that the rest of the document, the rest of the sustainability plan, can be updated and changed and amended as needed without having to update the comprehensive plan itself. So this is kind of the stuff that we'd stick in the plan, and if this needed to be amended, then it would go through a longer process. But the idea is that by incorporating this and referencing the plan, you're basically bringing everything into the comprehensive plan's umbrella. It's allowing some editing of the overall plan to occur outside of the comprehensive plan adoption process.
Thanks, Carlos. I think that kind of highlights an important point, in that what we're trying to do here with respect to the comprehensive plan is entirely in alignment with our sustainability plan.
That's correct.
So that's a question I had early on, and you clarify that perfectly here, that absolutely they do.
Should we go to the next one?
So can we just go ahead, Ann?
Thanks, Paul. And just wanting to emphasize lead by example as a city in making our municipality or municipal buildings less energy efficient, more energy efficient. And I don't know if it would even strengthen the statement to say that, you know, implementing a review process or an evaluation for each new design as the city moves forward with new builds. I mean, we know that it's happening, but stating that explicitly. And then, yeah, I think, Paul, it's interesting your point about it's tricky to, you know, how do you make a statement about collaborating with the utilities? You know, what does that look like in this plan as far as supporting the consumer?
Well, and I was wondering if that might show up in the last bullet point here, evaluate and reimagine policies and make energy efficiency and renewable adoption more accessible. Maybe maybe a tag on. I mean, Excel was very helpful with our energy action plan, and I'm hoping that, you know, as they move through their customer base, their communities with action plan adoption, that they come back in a couple of years and follow up, you know, like you were mentioning, and we should, with some type of regular review of the work that we've done, and maybe plotting a course forward to continue to move toward their goals.
Yeah, I think that piece about kind of review, Paul, might make sense at the very end, the last piece of a general sustainability pieces, as I think it's true for any of our initiatives, is that we want to be kind of continually evaluating that piece and improving. So maybe we just park that one till then. Right. Are we good to go on to the transportation, or any other strategies for energy we want to go over? I'll take that as transportation. On to transportation. Okay, so with transportation, probably the overall vision statement is that Winona residents and visitors to town are able to get around town via the mode of transportation of their choice. So we would be a multimodal city, car, bike, walk, public transportation. An important equity consideration is making sure those with limited mobility or who are dependent on a particular type of transportation are included in the decision making, so that we are including all voices. We want to help facilitate energy efficiency in transportation, and that's I think that's probably most evident with electric vehicles. But you know, maybe to a lesser degree, bicycling as well, and some of those low carbon options. And that kind of fits nicely with making the city really more multimodal, or having that work for a variety of modes, because we definitely hear from people that we'd like bike lanes and electric vehicle charging, and those aren't always aren't as available as people would like. Right. So for implementing those goals, we would kind of work with the state Department of Transportation, neighboring communities that have public transportation systems, and of course residents, hearing from them about what they like to see and need. We'd also want to balance transportation needs with recreation areas and environmental considerations. So this is like how we maintain our streets, particularly in wintertime with chlorides and other things that are applied to the streets, and to some degree also considering runoff and other items there that, you know, right now our streets are the major pathway for waters, for stormwater to enter our river and lake. We want to be good about encouraging walking and biking with signage and infrastructure and just and being conducive to that. We'll need to work to expand electric vehicle adoption. This goes both for what our city operations, but more broadly the community, having EV stations and working on getting that to be available to probably more so people who are passing through town and tourists, but also for folks in town to have that. And a big challenge actually that we will have to do is working with like the rental communities and how they can use electric vehicles. We're doing on-street parking, so that's kind of an ongoing issue, or isn't an issue at this moment, but you know, we foresee that being a problem with expanded electric vehicles, how to make that work for rental folks.
And I'll say a lot of this, if not all of it, is in concert with what our transportation subcommittee has been discussing, the multimodal aspect. It's definitely present in our existing 2007 comprehensive plan, but that'll be reaffirmed in this plan, as well as making sure that we're working on connections between points of interest, not just where people need to go, but also where people want to go, access to recreational resources, and connections to places where people can get out and enjoy the outdoors. So that is definitely something that will kind of be in, that'll be working together between not only the environment section, but also the transportation section as well.
Yep. So.
Hey, Carlos, I just would like to emphasize that last point that you made of merging need and recreation and route design.
Yes, and so I was just thinking, I don't know if this is delineated more in the full plan, but for example, you know, I have encouraged numerous occasions that the future option of having a loop or you know, a tram that goes and circulates, a circulator route just downtown that goes past Fastenal lots, comes back on 4th Street over to Franklin and just continues the loops, perhaps during the busy hours of the day, and that might be tied into a loop that might be that alternates every 3rd or 4th loop downtown to be able to go past out to Prairie Island or past the trail access points that we have in town, so that people have an option of being able to circulate downtown from their parking areas to the businesses that they want to frequent, or circulate past the universities to the recreation areas and or the train stations, so that they can get access to those areas and the other modes of transportation. So I don't know if that's a detailed point that's in the full plan or not, or if it probably doesn't fit here. Maybe it does. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there. Again, I don't have the full plan in front of me.
Yeah, you know, and I think that gets to kind of the last, the idea that you can drive in, park your car once, and then get to multiple places from that one destination. That's part of it too. And I think to a certain extent, our favorite scooters that have just appeared help us do that a little bit. So, but definitely thanks for that, that input. Anything else, John?
Yeah, I think that probably a key point Carlos brought up is that this is transportation is also being addressed by there is a specific subcommittee on that, as well as we also have a complete streets plan, and that's a lot of this is taken from that complete streets plan, and I think that was 2017. So some of the stuff isn't new; it's sort of already policy, but just highlighting it as having an environmental connection. So I'm gonna scroll on down to our water piece. And this was actually the most engaged topic in the sustainability planning process. The goals are pretty simple. Maintain a sustainable water supply for our city. And then the second point of protect water quality and aquatic resources. Pretty quick on paper, takes a lot of different steps to get there. So the first piece first strategy is looking at groundwater. That's where we get virtually all of our drinking water. And so making sure we're not over drawing, taking it at a sustainable rate, but also protecting that, because once it's contaminated, we'd be in some real trouble, very costly to correct that. Another strategy is this wording I think is going to maybe change a little bit. I think it's a little bit confusing. Implement municipal structures that better reflect the value of water. And I think what that is really trying to say is clarifying our water bill so that people can read that and understand their usage, and also, you know, potentially working on doing some things around different rates for high users or irrigation for lawns, kind of things that you know are right now billed at the same rate as everything else, but maybe are ways that we could conserve water. And in parallel to saving water is really emphasizing using native plants and landscaping, stuff that doesn't really need nearly as much water, and also captures runoff and stormwater for improved water quality. You know, certainly because we have a built-out city, stormwater infrastructure right now largely leads to our lake and our river mostly. So there is going to be some kind of retrofitting to really improve that situation, to infiltrate stormwater and maintain our lake area. And you know, so there's some work there that's going to need to happen to really change the water quality situation in our surface waters. Lastly, is maintaining what we have for built stormwater infrastructure, and to some degree our water and wastewater plants as well, to make sure that they are operating as they're designed, working well. Our water and wastewater folks are, you know, they are vigilant, but just to make sure that they're getting the resources they need to do what they need to do. All right, so questions, comments? What do folks think?
Well, I posted what I think might be another strategy, because I don't know if it fits in or if that's stated in any of these strategies. And I think it's important. I see a lot of homes and I see a lot of water appliances, and I see a huge potential for water savings, which can help residents with their water bill, reduce their water bill, and help reduce the overall consumption that we have from our aquifer. And then just another point about the second bullet in strategies, just say clarify and detail our water bill rather than the language that's there.
When I think about the protection that it's going to take for protecting groundwater, a lot of that is happening needs to happen outside of the city limits. And it seems to be the responsibility of the county. Am I correct? And I wonder if this is appropriate in this this place to say, to really support the county in their efforts to protect the groundwater and the headwaters of our streams, where the city doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction. And the county seems like it really could use support and needs to be recognized that we depend on the county to protect our water quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. One reference that we don't currently make in this plan, and that we should, is that there is a regional water shed planning operation going on between various counties, watershed districts, and the city, known as the WINLAC. And probably we should reference that in here too, is to support those efforts, which is certainly outside the city boundaries, for aquifer protection.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And of course, I'm a former soil water board supervisor, and it's difficult. I think that there are members of the county board who are working toward increasing the budget of the soil water board. Unfortunately, they're an elected body who doesn't have a authorization to levy in order to do their work. But the Winona County SWCD is budgeted at half to only 60 or 70% of our neighboring counties, which have population sizes that are half of Winona County. And so, I think, encouraging the county to, budget SWCD at a higher rate can help with surface water issues through best practices. So yeah, I think, that kind of language, some type of language that shows that we're willing to collaborate or encourage the county to do the work that, is important to preserve the water quality for both surface and groundwater. It's difficult. It's important that language is chosen carefully, because clearly there are political walls or barriers go up when water quality is used in many parts of the rural community in America, not just Winona County. And so the language should be carefully chosen. But yeah, if we can say somehow we support the county's efforts, somehow that would, I think, and then be present, when the county actually does make an effort to be present and visible, showing our support.
Yeah, a lot of what we experience here in Winona, the quality of what we experience is dependent on the success of that organization. And a lot of what we do here will support the success of communities that are downstream from us. Like our stormwater runoff mitigation, when it comes to our wastewater treatment plant, is truly benefiting La Crosse, as well as other areas downstream from us. So we need to really, to hear about fish kills in the county and not knowing or how to prevent that, and I think about how much of that water is flowing right past us right here at Prairie Island after dumping into the Mississippi River. So yeah, it's having a concern about what's happening upstream and having a role through WINLAC and I think is really critical here to protect the quality of the water here in Winona. But another something that I see quite often is, just the homeowner use of fertilizers and pesticides, and how that directly impacts water quality of Lake Winona through stormwater runoff and wondering if there could be a statement about incentivizing and educating homeowners in their use of chemicals in their own properties. And I know that there's a lot of work that's being done around this through communication efforts and education through AmeriCorps volunteers, but you know, how can we really speak to valuing or helping our community members understand what they, maintaining a perfectly green lawn, what that might mean for the rest of the community.
Yeah, I know, John, we've just back to Ann's point, which is, you know, a very good one. And I know Ann is familiar with Healthy Lake Winona, and we've had this discussion numerous times and over the last few years in trying to get this educational material, the information inserted or to go along with the water bill. So this whole point about clarifying the detail of the water bill, but also using that mailing, we all get it, to have an opportunity to educate, you know, the water users in town about what they can do or should do in order to improve the water quality of our nearby surface waters, namely Lake Winona.
That's a good point, and I think we call that out in the full sustainability plan, but those details just don't get shown up here. All right, very well. Move on to waste. The next category, waste reduction. Okay, we call this one waste reduction. I think we could be sometimes called waste and recycling. Open to suggestions there. But the essential piece here is to really work on the reduce, to then reuse, to then recycle. That recycling is not the first step, it's the last step, the last piece. We really want to minimize waste and reuse what we have before recycling. Another consideration is working to better manage organic waste, having options for folks to do composting. I mean, right now there's yard waste options, but there's certainly interest by some of our institutions to do more organic recycling, certainly, and also at the individual level. We get a number of questions about how to do composting, where it's illegal. So just to make that easier and more clear as to how and what people can do. You know, and the county runs a lot of our recycling program, but for strategies, we want to work with them so folks understand what's recyclable. They're using recycling in, you know, at events, for example, and just making that program easier to use. People are more likely to recycle. Another strategy is to improve our disposal and waste reduction, production. Possibly one way to do that is with different fee structure and incentives. You know, getting your trash is pretty cheap and easy at this point in time, and you know, maybe it doesn't reflect the full cost of that service. And kind of a direct follow-up to the goal of organics is to really explore and try to get more organics recycling happening, also known as composting. And a last piece is working in the construction waste area and trying to get more reuse, taking materials to the restore, for instance. Yeah, construction and demolition waste makes about 60% of the total waste stream statewide. So it is by tonnage. So it is a very large piece that maybe is less considered by the average person, but it is a huge part of the whole waste picture. All right, thoughts, suggestions? I can't hear you, Dan. We trying to talk, Dan? Couldn't hear you.
Here, how's that?
Yep, now you're loud and clear.
Okay, I got a laptop and a big screen. I think I muted when I took that call. I hope you weren't hearing. Sorry, I had to take a call. Anyway, yeah, in that second bullet, you know, all waste disposal in Winona, virtually all of it, it's all private businesses, and so they're charging what it costs to deal with that waste. So that the suggestion that the city could somehow implement new fee structures, and what purpose that would serve, I think that's kind of questionable. I mean, it sounds like a new tax on garbage or something. And why would that be when there's no municipal landfill, right? I mean, our trash, it doesn't even stay local. I don't think most of it even stays in state.
That's true. It often goes to either the cross area or Iowa for landfilling.
Yeah, so a suggestion that somehow, you know, the city could engage in some fee structuring plan, essentially make it more expensive to dispose of your waste, to discourage waste, and what would that really solve? I think people would pay the freight. It couldn't be that much. And where would that money go? And I just don't like, I like the incentives part. Not a fan of the free structure thing. You know, taxing garbage that goes to different states for disposal, and landfills are highly regulated entities these days too, as you well know. So even if it goes out of state, it's probably being handled pretty appropriately.
John,
Anyway,
I'm wondering if there's some detail in the plan that pulled this language out that we're not reading, and that maybe this needs to be wordsmithed differently that gets to the details that are in the full plan.
Yeah, I have the full plan. That statement is pretty much directly stated in the plan. It's on page 8. Improve disposal and reduce waste production with fee structures and incentives. And in parentheses afterwards, it says review. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe somebody else didn't like that fee structure verbiage also. Do you know what that review means there? Anyone? John?
I think that was one that had been flagged by somebody as you are, Dan. That they're not supportive of that language, and I think part of it was also what right now that really is the county has a waste surcharge, and you know, does the city have any authority to do anything there? And I guess the second piece is, should we? Yeah, so I mean, I know from one of our considerations is, you know, garbage trucks do a lot of damage to our roads, and right now that cost isn't really being borne or being paid back to us. So I mean, I forget the numbers, but you know, one garbage truck does the damage of, you know, 1,000 cars or something. So it's a huge. They're probably the most damaging thing that goes on most residential streets to the condition. But
and for many of us on the east end of town, they're using our alleyways, which, you know, we have residents complaining about the condition of our alleyways. So I kind of, you know, somewhat agree with Dan on this, but I'm wondering, you know, if we need to periodically review how yeah, it's a difficult sentence. I agree with Dan. It's a difficult sentence. I don't know how it moves us forward on anything, unless there were other fees or something that that we get from the haulers that they're already paying, and I think that's going to the county. Or so, yeah. So, good question, Dan. Good point.
Oh, and by the way, right when I had to take that call, in our transportation goals, in the second bullet, and John, I believe you caught this by omission. I'm sorry, on the first bullet for under strategies, transportation goals. First bullet, second sentence. I think that was a holdover, right? Did you catch that? It's the same sentence that appears under the energy goals.
Yes, the assist energy.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
You just need to slash that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know how it is. You use a template and something gets holed over because you used the template and forgot to eliminate something. Happens all the time.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
We'll take that puppy out. Okay. Anything else we want to discuss about waste and waste reduction?
I'd like to just emphasize all of the manufacturing that happens within our community and the use of raw materials, and that fourth bullet of implementing reuse initiatives. You know, how can we continue to partner with local industry to direct some of those recycled materials into manufacturing?
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, definitely a couple of businesses have asked, that we help facilitate a kind of a sharing network for surplus materials and keeping that stuff useful rather than being discarded. Natural resources. There are four value statements here. One, first is working with other units of government and organizations to manage our natural areas, but certainly still working on doing economic development in those areas. Also then to protect ecological integrity, specifically some of our more natural areas, the river corridor, bluff areas, and maybe probably other valued resources such as our parks and streams. We definitely want to follow environmental protection standards, and we want to really work and continue the efforts on natural ecosystem restoration. So lots of areas have invasive species. I know Paul and Ann are very avid participants in those efforts, but to make sure we continue and keep our eye on the ball with that one. So to achieve those goals, we would implement best practices for protecting ecosystems in the blufflands, and work on removing invasive species. We'd create or reimagine policies to support sustainability practices, so that we're meeting state standards for water quality and our general land use. We want to budget to protect areas while also I think you're protecting what we have. That's what we're trying to get at with this point. And then I think this last one is a duplicate. So actually one other carry on is restore urban tree coverage, but the one I've highlighted here is, I think, another duplicate from above. Yeah, so what
Oh.
about that?
Yeah, yep, you caught the duplicate. And I have a question about the third strategy. Budget to protect and maintain existing natural areas while creating a development preservation plan. So the last three words of that bullet, I'm just kind of curious, creating a development preservation plan. What does that mean?
I think my belief is that development is probably, I think we probably went to say while developing a preservation plan. So I think that development, you could probably either substitute that for the creating or developing. But I don't think that's, yeah, there's something not quite right with that language, but I think the idea is to work on our natural areas right now, but also have a plan for the areas that we aren't working on right now as well.
John, in the everyone in the current version of the, I believe it's current version of the full plan, on page 9, that particular phrase doesn't even appear. Looks like that was added. All it says in the full document is budget to protect and maintain existing natural areas. And so if we're really not quite sure what that verbiage means about creating a development preservation plan, maybe we just omit that language.
I think something that I've been coming up against quite a bit in this specific situation here down at Prairie Island is that there is no plan. And so I do have a question: what does creating a preservation plan include? Knowing that having a plan is seems to be really important as far as guiding any type of efforts that are made in public areas, getting buy-in from community members as well as organizations. And so, you know, I wonder, like, who would be responsible, you know, just knowing that these details probably won't come through in this bullet point, but I'm just curious, you know, who would we look to in the creation of a preservation plan or conservation or habitat reclamation plan? And what types of access might there be to resources in order to implement, you know, said plans? So I had 3 points. So that was the one point that I had. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that, yeah, right now it probably is a mix of myself and the Parks Department who work on the protection plans and are responsible for implementing those. But you know, I think we've seen with Prairie Island that it probably would make sense to just really specify who's in charge there and who can give the okay.
And I think too, emphasizing in this section here too, coordination with the Park and Recreation Subcommittee and section of the plan, especially, of course, for publicly owned properties. So when you're planning for recreation areas, you're planning for recreation, but also preservation too.
And when I think of who, I've heard the DNR, you know, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I've heard the Minnesota Land Trust. What about local education, like the Winona State, I think St. Mary's and biology program is moving more towards health sciences, but you know, who can we look to, maybe not outside of the city, because we don't have, you know, those types of resources necessarily within the city to do the natural resource inventory, to come up with conservation plans, or, you know, maybe we do, but it just doesn't seem like it's happening as much as I think some folks have been hoping it would.
Looks like Paul had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to speak this verbally too. I really, actually, I'm somewhat adamant about having as a strategy to develop a preservation or conservation plan. Um, I I know that all of this is a comprehensive plan, um, but as part of it, we've had this discussion at Healthy Lake Winona numerous times, and we keep doing this and doing that, and all we're really doing is kind of putting medicine on the symptoms because we don't have a plan. Um, and uh, it might be a little bit of a short range plan, but there's no long range plan for the restoring the health of Lake Winona, and and so I think it's important that we have these types of plans in other parts of the comp plan that relate to streets and stormwater, et cetera. But I think we need to say as a strategy, we need to have some type of conservation and preservation plan.
Got it. Okay.
And I think that there's an opportunity here to really to add, in addition to protecting, conserving, reclaiming, to add educating about the value of our spaces. And that would indicate that through including education, that we're doing outreach to, the city is supportive of education within our schools, but also supporting education within our public spaces through park and rec, and different city-owned properties, and also supporting environmental education efforts through instructors and development of what that looks like, the curriculum.
That's a good point.
I have one other point when we get to restore urban tree coverage. I really want to do that, and that's something I hear from many people. Those of us who are baby boomers who grew up, kind of were here in Winona before the Dutch elm disease kind of decimated our tree coverage in town, and we're kind of going through this again with the emerald ash borer. But one thing that we don't have that's related to this strategy is maintaining tree growth using best forestry or arborist practices. Because we have many boulevard trees that aren't properly groomed or pruned, so that so that they grow in a way that creates a proper coverage without having these dangerous limbs or these numerous limbs that are coming out. I know for many years after we cleared the elm trees that we were letting people plant trees in the boulevard, and there were these multi-trunk trees, and now they're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're breaking and busting all over the place. And so something about managing tree growth with best practices, I think maybe should be added.
I agree, Paul. I think in that word restore urban tree coverage, I think we might assume, but maybe stating explicitly like the planting and maintenance of the growth of new trees. I think that there's been such a big emphasis globally just on planting trees, but not the true understanding of what it takes to establish those as mature safe, non-hazardous structures.
Maybe just a simple statement like restore urban tree coverage using best management practices. Or if you want to add something about arborist or the profession itself, and you could just add that little tidbit that say it's not enough just to plant trees everywhere, but it's planting the right trees, maintaining the trees. We don't want all that verbiage in here, but a simple statement that would imply that you have to do this right. It's not just about planting maples everywhere. They'll plant themselves.
Well, and that sustainability theme is one of our overarching themes in the comp plan. So, even related to all the other topics, you don't just want to build housing just to put up housing. You want to build housing that can be sustainable for future generations and go through different iterations and family changes and changes in how our city grows and develops into the future. And that extends to this topic as well. So definitely something we need to be considerate of as we plan for the future.
I'll move on to the food aspect, our last kind of specific piece here. The first is just acknowledging that local food has health, economic, and environmental benefits. And specifically, another piece is working on proper kind of foraging rules and regulations. I get those questions a lot about mushrooms and other things on city land and what are those really available for public use. So the strategies to advance the local food category are one is to create resource hub and food libraries to allow access to locally grown foods and connect local vendors to market opportunities. So that's having a farmers market, having little free food libraries that are in some places in town, making sure that fostering that. We also want to expand, maybe another word would be maintain access to community gardening, and provide some resources so people can be successful in those gardens. And the last piece is adjust or create city code to make local food gardening and harvesting more accessible. And so that's really making sure people are allowed to have gardens, and also clarifying that piece about who can use the food that's in parks. Anything we're missing there? Any thoughts on these items?
I have a thought on the rules on utilizing for food harvest, public lands. Again, adding that word education about, what's available and how it's sustainably harvested. But then dare we start to manage our public lands for foraging? Could that become an element or an item in a conservation, preservation, reclamation plan?
Yeah, I think we'd have to reference that stuff there. But yeah, right now we don't really have a policy on what is allowable or not allowable. But yeah, it would make sense to have that referenced in any plan.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, to make the connection between that's setting the goal to maintain different communities of plants in different areas, because we know it's part of our community's foraging practices. In essence, looking at public land as creating the garden of our dreams, so to speak. But that's a little far out there.
Somewhere in the details, which might be spelled out, and so when that policy is developed, for some people, foraging for food means hunting and trapping, and so the details may need to be outlined so that that's clear, you know, what we're talking about. You know, it says food, and for a lot of people, you know, when you say food, that means meat to them, and so I doubt if we're considering allowing people to harvest squirrels and rabbits and deer within the city limits. So something to consider when the language is finalized.
Any other discussion on this, or should we wrap up with our general kind of objectives? Last category. I'll keep going on. Okay. So these are three goals that didn't really fit into any one, but we still thought were important to include somewhere. And so one is to better communicate about sustainability and resilience. So educating the public on kind of why these initiatives are important is how I would summarize that. We also want to be accountable to implementing our goals and you make sure that this plan is actionable. And so I think, Paul, this goes back to your point about reviewing and making sure that that the work is being done well. So I could add some piece about review and revise processes over time. And the last piece is, being a resilient city with both our physical and community infrastructure, so that we're able to respond to weather emergencies or stresses. That it really just being resilient and having a sustainability and tying that to sustainability. And the general strategies here are to promote and foster environmental stewardship, have more city communication and education about sustainability, expand sustainability work through city departments so that it's kind of everybody's feels that they have some role to play because they do. Another strategy is establish a sustainability commission. There's as Dan's well aware and on, the city's environmental quality committee. They don't have a whole lot of authority, and whether that makes sense to have something that's more a sustainability commission. I would say that's more the standard in cities these days. We want to make sure we're looking at items from an environmental justice standpoint as well, addressing any issues there, and also preparing for extreme weather and climate change. That is going to be continually a growing problem, or at least that's what we're planning for. So those sound good to folks, or? I mean, I guess the other option is going to need to be put somewhere else in the plan, but we weren't really, we thought they were important enough to include, but weren't really sure how they fit.
So John, if somebody asked me what it meant to address environmental justice issues, I'm not sure I would know what to tell them. What would you tell them?
I mean, in the case of Winona, I wouldn't say I really know what that looks like. The one area that I think we are working on is making sure that we are planting trees throughout the city and in low-income areas, and making sure that's being done not just in wealthier areas of town. So trying to be equitable about that. But yeah, and it's with multimodal transportation too. But we don't have, I wouldn't say we have a exactly defined and a list of environmental justice concerns.
Well, I think it might have, in my mind, it's how in the past, it's where did we locate or site hazardous waste facilities, city dump. I mean, those things are things of the past here in Winona, but also you know, might have to do with, you know, how are we looking at development? So, development might be, you know, encouraged in some areas because of blight. And then what happens, you know, if we develop a blighted area, and then we're ultimately raising the property values of the surrounding continued blighted areas, forcing people out, and that would be that wouldn't be just in my book. And so that might have to do with development, whether it's housing or you know, manufacturing or industrial. You know, here in Winona, the amount of space and areas to develop are very limited, and so you know, that might actually show up in the comp plan in a different area. The other thing might be when it comes to the building things as well. Okay, you know, are we, you know, is our infrastructure being constructed? I know we're doing stormwater rebuilds here and there. How is that impacting some of the neighborhoods further down the line as we're draining into the river or draining into Lake Winona? I know we have still some neighborhoods that with these heavy rainfalls are the streets are continuously flooding, and there's no relief for them, and they're poor neighborhoods. So, you know, I think Dan has a point a little bit, but I think we do have to consider what's happening to neighborhoods when we're doing something else, like further upstream.
Okay, good point. I think I get it. No, I think maybe a slight verbiage change would be in order then, because this sort of, the way this is worded here kind of suggests, you know, folks, we got a problem. We need to address this problem. And the fact is, to point to a specific problem, at this point in time, like Paul said, a lot of things in the past happened. But at this point in time, there's probably nothing in particular you could point to. But then again, we should consider in any future improvement environmental justice issues. So maybe if we just said, ensure that environmental justice is a consideration in all environmental and sustainability goals and strategies. Just making sure that that is going to be a consideration moving forward, so that, you know, we don't, like where was St. Paul, where they built the major highway and destroyed the old black neighborhood, you know, and that kind of stuff went on in Chicago, where I'm from. Probably we're not likely to see anything that egregious, probably, hopefully, ever again. But then again, as Paul pointed out, you can do improvements, or what are deemed to be improvements, that are good for this neighborhood and maybe not so good for the person down the street, upstream, downstream, whatever. So I think if you word that a little bit different, I would like that. Just ensuring that that is a consideration without suggesting it's like some sort of a major problem.
And I think that directly aligns with some of the realities among the subcommittees. Our accessible government committee, and our accessible government committee has a focus on improving relationships between the city and the residents of the city of Winona. And part of that is, you know, when considering development projects or projects that are going to change, you know, what is happening land use wise in the city, making sure to explicitly consider, you know, who is this helping, who might this be impacting, and making sure that that's part of the decision-making process. So in my mind, this interacts perfectly with that subcommittee and the direction that they've given as well. Let me check with Luke on something. I'll be right back.
So there's one environmental justice issue that persists in the East End. And the reason why, a big reason why we moved out of the East End is air quality. And I know we're at the end and we're not going to specific detail, but I haven't heard that mentioned at all. I know that it does affect families. To what degree, I don't know. Other than smell, I don't know what the health hazards might be related to, the air quality issues due to foundries in the East End. But I just thought that should be mentioned at this point.
That's a great point, Ann. And Winona does have periods during the year when we have some issues. We had a version here in the valley, and I've, even before MnDOT did this work and proposed it, I mean, I personally favored moving the truck route all the way out to Pelzer. They come in 43, send them back down the highway over to Pelzer, and then they're making left turns onto the interstate bridge instead of sharp right turns. And it would save us all this grief here within the inner city on Mankato and Sarnia and Main and 4th Street getting to the bridge, and all the issues it has with infrastructure damage, but all that those diesel emissions. And that way, the diesel emissions are primarily, not entirely, but primarily kept in a more open, less populated area. And I don't know, maybe it would solve it, maybe it wouldn't. But that's kind of the detail. But there is a little bit of a point to what Ann is saying. Good point.
Have you smelled the foundry exhaust? In addition, I wasn't referring to the diesel trucks. I was referring to the foundry businesses.
I've definitely...
But that's also an issue as well.
I think that the challenge there, and Ann, I worked at Diamond Huller. I know I walked home black every day. So I know just how bad it can be. The challenge there is that they're being regulated. All their emissions are regulated by the MPCA, and so I assume if they're not being cited and have constant violations, they're within their legal guidelines. That's an assumption on my part, and so it becomes very difficult. Just like to Paul's point, he tried to work with setting up truck routes. Well, that's the DOT, and it's hard to get the DOT to change the way they think things ought to be. So that's the challenge there, is you're dealing with regulatory agencies that are kind of over our heads. There's not much we can do about it, So that'd be my point there, is that there's not a heck of a lot you can do. And then again, some of those businesses are there due to being grandfathered in. They've been there forever. It's industrial properties. And it just so happened that folks way back when started building houses right next door to them. And it was just not an ideal situation. It's similar with, SciTech and the neighbors on 4th Street. It is not an ideal situation, but those houses were built in a place that was owned, was zoned for that industry, and now we're kind of stuck with the residuals of the past. So I acknowledge the issues, but they're very difficult in the short term to do anything about it. Long term, you want to put your industries, and particularly those dirtier or smellier industries that aren't too bad. I mean, some you just don't want anywhere near your city, but those that are relatively clean but may have a smell probably applies to us over here. You know, ideally you'd put those away from neighborhoods. But again, like Paul pointed out, there's very limited developable land for new industry, and we're kind of stuck working with what we have, you know, keeping those good jobs in town, and you know, that's all.
And I will say that overall, our strategy with the land use subcommittee has been to try and integrate land uses as much as possible, with the exception of heavy industry next to residential. So definitely looking at addressing that in the long term, providing places for additional industrial expansion, but making sure that you're not putting up a house or a housing development right next door. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your participation, not just in our first meeting, but also in this meeting. What John and I will do then is work on incorporating your comments today into an introduction or a context for this particular section of the comprehensive plan. And this section would go to the steering committee's meeting on September 29th. And so I'm not sure if committee members would want to meet one more time, or if we would just put something together for that meeting on the 29th of September. What we'd be looking at doing is, for each one of the specific subcommittees, thanks, Paul, we would have about 15 minutes to present to the steering committee. And so that's kind of what we're looking at doing the 29th of September. So I guess if everybody's okay here, could you bring that up? Paul is maybe he's saying he maybe would like to present at the steering committee. Would you be available, Paul, on the 29th for about 15 minutes? It's 11 to 1 is when we'd have that meeting.
Yeah, and I think my point would be, I would like to be present at the steering committee.
Oh, present. Not present. I thought you meant present.
Yeah, and I know Luke said that we will need somebody to present.
Yeah.
The steering committee. I'm inclined to leave that to possibly to Ann or Dan or John. I mean, John may have too many hats here. I don't know, but I'm going to maybe beg off of presenting, but I kind of would like to be there listening to the dialogue.
Okay. And in terms of meeting at another time, would you all be comfortable with us kind of drafting something based off your comments from the meeting today?
And we'll share that out to them too, right? I mean,
yep.
So you'll have a chance to see it before.
Okay.
And maybe I know some of our members were unable to attend. One is, I think, teaching at Cotter at the moment. Will they have an opportunity to weigh in?
Yes, we'll send in our we'll send out our draft prior to that 29th meeting and ask for input on that draft.
Yeah, I think there were a few other absences, were there not?
Yeah, there were a few other folks. I think Nicole and Neil Mundell.
So maybe what we could do, actually, given the absences, is schedule one more meeting, but a short meeting, maybe about a half-hour meeting mid-September sometime.
I think that'd be a good idea, to give some of those members an opportunity to voice any concerns they may have. And if that meeting, maybe, you know, after the typical school hours, make it at 3:30.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, and that was just what I was going to say, to make it accessible to our friends who are working during the school day. Neil, I mean, I know his schedule really changes semester to semester, but you know, usually my experience is when we get to about the 4 o'clock hour, we usually can catch a lot of the university crowd as well.
Okay, great. We will send out a doodle poll for a meeting in mid-September later on in the afternoon. So we'll meet one more time, do a short meeting, and look to that September 29th steering committee as well.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
thanks everyone.
Sounds great.
Super. Great weekend, everyone.
Thank you too.